I have in my possession a secret map by the planners of the New World Order.
Because the global order is changing again.
A new world order.
According to the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin is even now waging a hybrid war against the United States, the Russian Federation being the current king of the North, according to the Daniel 11 hypothesis on biblicalresearchlabs.com, with the United States, which is Manasseh, being the current king of the South. But behind the scenes of Russia's hybrid warfare with the United States are two warring factions of Kenites within the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, which is symbolic of the Kenite shadow government. This is what nation shall rise against nation means, as Christ says in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. In other words, the Kenite nation shall rise up against itself within the he-goat through multipolar versus unipolar globalism. According to an article on globalsecurityreview.com, hybrid warfare combines conventional and unconventional methods, including military operations, cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, and economic pressure, and education, which includes the electronic media, economics, politics, and religion, are the four hidden dynasties of the Kenites, which line up with 1830, 1913, 1945, and 1948, when the first four trumpets began to sound, and then in 1969 the fifth trumpet began to sound, but 5 means grace in biblical numerics, and the grace period of the fifth trumpet will end at the woe of the fifth trumpet when the 5-month-long hour of temptation begins. Daniel's 70th week having been shortened from 7 years to 5 months, but at this time the multipolarist Kenites for the most part work through Edom, which means red, the Russian Federation still being communistic obviously, but the multipolarist Kenites are also working through the hidden agents of Edom within the political parties and media of the United States, with the left-right paradigm being symbolized by Ammon and Moab, which is really Stalinism and Trotskyism. That's why you see Edom, Ammon, and Moab listed together throughout the Bible. The unipolarist Kenites, for the most part, work through the left-right paradigm, as opposed to the multipolarist Kenites, who again, for the most part, work through Edom, within the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, which is symbolic of the Kenite shadow government, with the great horn of the he-goat, which is the same thing as the one who sends a raiser of taxes, being the United Nations. The raiser of taxes itself is the Paris Climate Accord, sent by the UN because it was brought about by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But as we know from Daniel 11:14, the robbers of thy people, meaning the Kenites, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, meaning the vision of a new world order as it's called, but they shall fall. And that word translated as fall in the Hebrew is a word that in this case means to fail, because the one world political system written of in Revelation 13 won't emerge until after the great horn of the he-goat gets broken, because that's when Satan and his angels get cast to earth, which is when the so-called New World Order will come into being, having 7 heads, which are symbolic of the 7 continents of the planet Earth, and 10 horns, which are symbolic of 10 fallen angel kings, when the Ezekiel 38 confederacy becomes the bear of Daniel chapter 7, and the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8 becomes the leopard of Daniel chapter 7, which is symbolic of the Kenites and their 4 hidden dynasties, providing the infrastructure of the one world system that won't come into being until the woe of the 5th trumpet at the beginning of the 5-month-long hour of temptation. The lion of Daniel chapter 7 is symbolic of the Christian nations up until just after the deadly wound to the one world political system, because that's when Satan appears as the Antichrist at the woe of the 6th trumpet, which is when most Christians will begin worshiping Satan instead of Christ, which is what Antichrist means. The true Christ won't return at all until 2.5 months later at the woe of the 7th trumpet, and as the true Christ says in the last verse of Mark chapter 13, what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch.
Let me warn you,
A new world order.
and let me warn the nation.
A new world order.